To start this evening, we have Dr. Tony Waltham, one of the best known caving names in the world. He will set the scene on exploration and science around the world and in Britain. And so without further ado, I'll pass over to Tony.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and members of society. And I'll first of all make an apology from the caving world for the photograph which appeared of Mr. Evis as a portrait, which is the scariest thing I've seen in 100 years of caving. This evening, I've been asked to talk about cave exploration. I'm hoping the lights are going to go down soon, because otherwise I'm not going to know what's going to go on. Are they down as low as they go? No, surely they must go below that. Is that it? All right. Okay, fine, we're going off. Andy asked me to talk about British cave exploration by British cavers home and abroad over the last 50 years. I thought I'd start off, therefore, by ignoring him and starting 130 million years ago. Because this is really when things got relevant. Because 130 million years ago, the Tropic of Cancer, you can see down there, and the Ionian Sea. The important thing, though, was that we had roughly the bits of land, the bits of the Earth's plates, which are now England and Britain and France, roughly like they are, as you can see. This was then significant because it did mean that the French had in their Ionian Sea a huge amount of limestone to great thickness deposited, whilst in Britain we didn't. And consequently in France you've got enormous limestone mountains with potential for caves which are extraordinary, and lots of jolly enthusiastic cavers who think they're very good. And we in Britain have to suffice the thin slice of carboniferous limestone perched across the Yorkshire Dales and compete against the French, but in nearly all cases we do very well, so that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. The point is, the English and the French have had a certain amount of contretemps over this over the years. There was the Battle of Agincourt some time ago. There was a minor fracas in Waterloo, I believe, as well. But really the worst thing that ever happened was in 1895, when Britain's finest cave, Britain's great pothole up in the Yorkshire Dales, Gaping Gill, was first descended by a Frenchman. This was horrendous. The word around the pubs in Bradford and Leeds was awful. "Hey, lad, a Frenchman's been down to Hall." You know, and it went on. It was very bad indeed. Basically, what Mr. Martel did, who was a pretty good lad actually, in 1895, is he descended into the Great Chamber in Gaping Gill and really ratted off a lot of people in England. But it did therefore spark off a burst of exploration which went on for what has been going on ever since. And over the years after Mr. Martel went, the Yorkshire Ramblers Club basically started things going with exploring lots of caves in the Yorkshire Dales. These are just some of them here, and other things as well. And we were having a great time exploring our caves in this country. Meanwhile, the French, unfortunately, had got in the Vercors a huge pile of limestone which ended up on the top of the Vercors Plateau. And in 1956 it was that they found then the Bursar Cave. Actually, this is really one of the most superb caving trips anywhere in the world. It's got everything you want and a long descent. It's absolutely magnificent. The French did very well finding it. The fact it was in their back garden, of course, helped. They explored this all the way down. It took them some years to get to the bottom. In those days, of the primitive equipment that they had, it took them years to get to the bottom as well. But eventually they got to the bottom of a cave which was more than a kilometre deep. Should, by the way, mention just here, because it's just coming up again, on the right-hand side you can see the name Paul Deakin. I give the credit here to him for that photograph. The photographs are mine, except where there's a notice in the bottom corner. It might be in the bottom left, I'm not sure as well, saying when there are others. And to those people, I say thank you right now, and I refuse to take the credit. But basically, further down the Bursar, the French expedition finally stopped in 1957. It was when they first got down to the bottom, that's right, at a sump, a pool of water. They then had the deepest cave in the world. Oh dear, this was really bad news to the British. It was 6 years later that the next expedition ever got to the bottom of the Bursar Cave, to that sump pool which you can see there. And that was a British expedition. led by a completely maniac or mad caver called Ken Pierce from Manchester, who, when he got down to the sump pool, which you can see there, the green pool in the background, he then grabbed a large boulder from the pile in the foreground, held the boulder to his chest, jumped in the pool, sank like a rock, because that's what he basically was, and reached a new depth and came out and claimed the world depth record. This is what I call enthusiasm and dedication. I see, great. This wasn't accepted by many people, mainly the French. But in fact, Ken Pierce went back the next year with diving gear and did actually go deeper and therefore got the record, which is very good. So this is the start of the Anglo-French friendly rivalry, shall we say. But we did other things too. Around this time, in the 1960s, we had the first big expedition going off with people saying, why don't we go and explore in those tropical areas? See, all the cavers lived in the Western world and Europe and in North America, and that's about it, really. Why don't we go to these tropical areas where there might be big and wonderful caves? And the first expedition out to there was by Pete Livesey, a climber. Many of you may know him, may know that name as one of the world's greatest climbers of his generation as well. He and Mike Boone, great caver as well, went to Jamaica, spent 6 months out there exploring caves galore and had a fabulous time out there. And this is the start of big long-term expeditions going away to far distant places. Meanwhile, of course, back in Europe, much of the exploration was taking place at those high mountains which the French had got, and also the Austrians and the Spanish too. Lots of exploration being done there. Pete Livesey, though, went to this one in Greece. He was the first guy to walk over the hill where the camera is for that photograph as well. To see that pothole there, he thought that looked good. He took an expedition back the next year. We went down there, and in fact it turned out he went straight down for about 1,500 feet. This is one of the few ledges on the way down there. The hole in the floor there, you can see, it's about 700 feet deep, and this is at the bottom of a 500-foot drop as well. An interesting bit of exploration. But this is, we got the Greek record as well, the national Greek record for cave depth. Meanwhile, the French had things on their own ground, and mainly in this area up in the Pierre-Saint-Martin region in the Pyrenees, where they found a superb cave, and they then got the world depth record back again from the British, because they got deeper in this cave by some few hundred meters as well. Oh, jolly well done for the French as well, but it's a jolly good cave as well. Around that time, we started looking a bit further abroad as well. Some of you might recognize that picture. In fact, being as we're at the Royal Geographical Society, if there's anyone who doesn't recognize that, you are henceforth expelled. All right? Okay, wrong book on the north side. The Himalayas, why not? They're limestone. The top of Everest is limestone, but not very much there. Much better is Annapurna around the corner. There's thousands of feet of limestone there, thousands of meters of limestone rising up to the top there as well. We went out to have a look at it back in 1970, an expedition we ran out there to find the caves there, and found out that there are virtually none, for very good geological and climatic reasons, which I won't go into now. But what we did find was the longest cave in that time in the Indian subcontinent, down in the foothills in Nepal, near to Pokhara, and that was the cave we found there. At that time, when we went in 1970, we couldn't get permission to go into the northeastern states of India, and it was only later that the British expeditions in 1992 started going into Meghalaya, where they have now found a fabulous series of caves. These obviously not my photographs because I've not been there. Fabulous series of caves which were now extend to many hundreds of kilometers as well. Oh, and a credit line there as well. Rob Evis, the son of Andy Evis, the chairman for this evening, who is an incredibly old person, because he's obviously got a son who's great enough to go and run expeditions like this. So his dad is just past it now anyway, and that's it. Around about the same time, back in the 1970s, back in the late 1970s now, John Middleton from Sheffield he just looked on the geological maps, found this great chunk of limestone in northern Iran, said, let's go out there, and he found a great big deep cave there as well, went down 700 or so meters. Because there was a potential for a depth record, we went back the next year as well to this cave, which went down a whole series of shafts. John Middleton's trip in 1971 had descended 26 shafts, going down a series of steps all the way down there. And at the bottom, they'd look down, and they could see down below a passage going off into the darkness. And this was a potential for a world record depth, because this was thousands of feet still above resurgence level in the valleys around there. This was wonderful. So we went back in 1972, and we went down the 26 hydraulic shafts as well. And when we got to the bottom, we said, look at that shaft, we'll go down here. And we went down there, and it was 15 feet down only, that's all, and walked round the corner, and 5 yards round the corner, there was a sump. And we couldn't go any further. And that was the end of our cave exploration there. But that was Garparau. And because of the publicity on that expedition in 1972, we made so much money from telling the story before we went, not after we got back, that we then set up the Garparau Foundation, modelled on your society's Mount Everest Foundation. So that keeps caving going as well. Other explorations elsewhere, all over the place have been. This is another one with the RGS. A couple of wandering geographers some years ago in Ethiopia found the great river passage in Sof Omar Cave. The first description of this appeared in your journal, the Geographical Journal. This was picked up and noticed by some cavers who went there a few years later and found, in fact, many, many miles of passage. It's still the longest cave in Africa as well. Absolutely wonderful cave in Sof Omar with a maze of passages there too. Other things are being done in other places too. We have Brits going all over the place. Chris Wood went to Hawaii and found the world's longest lava cave. He only explored part of it, but this is the first part, which was then continued by the Americans actually, but it wasn't the French. All right, and this is lava cave going very successfully as well. Meanwhile, Julia James, an enthusiastic caver from South Wales, then went to Australia to organise the Australians, because Julia decided the Australians needed organising, as only Julia could. And she organised an expedition to New Guinea, where they found a series of caves, including the great Atia Cave as well, which they thought was superb, and had some great explorations in there. Meanwhile, another caver from the Mendips, Derek Ford, who'd done his PhD at Oxford University, then moved to McMaster University in Canada, set up a lab there, which had turned out to be the world's foremost and first speleo dating lab, when they could start dating stalagmites, an incredibly important story as well. But he was also exploring the caves in Canadian Rockies with a team of cavers who are all British cavers who moved over there to work with Derek, and including finding this one, that's Mount Castleguard, a name which is important in caving circles nowadays, because underneath there is a cave which is 6 miles long. That's just a straight line of the main passage, and it ends up, it's the only cave in the world to go underneath an ice field, and it ends up at a sparkling wall of ice 1,000 feet beneath the Columbia ice field. This is great because it tells us something about what the caves were doing in this country during the Ice Ages. That's another part of the story, leave that out for now. We had a British expedition going from here too. Mr. Evis was on this one as well, good heavens above, and Dave Brooke, when they went out to New Guinea in 1975, and again found some rather fine caves, which were spectacular too. But at the same time, well no, a few years, 2 or 3 years after that lot, the French went out. They didn't go to New Guinea, they went to New Britain, the island off the northeast coast of New Guinea, and they did find, and what the French do, they do it so well, it buggers me off, it really does. Why do they do it? They found the Nare, this is it, an 800-foot deep shaft going into a phenomenal river passage. This is almost the world's ultimate pothole in terms of exploration. It was absolutely fantastic. They explored down this river passage for a couple of miles or so with a huge amount of water roaring down there. This is a brilliant piece of exploration, all right? No great depth and no great length, but it was fantastic. But the exciting thing was that the very last bit was too difficult for the French, and it was a British expedition which got to the end of the cave. Hooray! Thank you, Dave Gill, which came on later on, so we're doing well there. Back home in this country, we've been doing things as well up in the Yorkshire Dales. If you don't recognise that, you should be shot. Where there are lots of caves up there. We're finding caves all over the place, all over the last 50 years or so as well. The stalagmites giving an important part of the scientific story. You'll hear more of that later on anyway. And other places where the caves are just a little bit lower to get through, but never mind, could be done. To give you some idea of how a cave exploration works. All right, this is a map. It's the only maps I've got, I promise you. This is the Gaping Gill cave system, all right, in the Yorkshire, on the side of Ingleborough. There up at the top end is Gaping Gill, with the red bit there is a cave. That's the chamber which Mr. Martel found, Monsieur Martel, I'm sorry, in 1895. The resurgence where the water comes out is down the bottom end here at Ingleborough Cave, and there's a bit of walk-in passage there the Brits had found. That's what the map of the area looked like in 1895. Because of the impetus from Martell, the Yorkshire Ramblers Club went back there again, found many miles of passages. By 1909 it was looking like that, and we were on our way now to getting towards Ingleborough Cave. And the succession of explorations from there on were basically a record of the great cavers of the country as well at that time. 1937, Eric Hensler explored 1/4 of a mile of passage flat out on his own before he then broke into a big piece of cave you can see there too. This was followed up in the 1950s by Bob Leakey, one of the great cavers who was totally impervious to anything at all like comfort and cold and water or anything like that at all. He found chunks of cave at both ends as well, which made the map looking like that. This was followed in the 1960s by other great explorations, notably led by Dave Brooke, the greatest caver in the Yorkshire Dales without doubt, and we're looking like that in 1968. This is then followed up by the divers who came in, Jeff Eden and Mike Wooding and people like that. So that by 1983, they'd actually linked up the cave from one end to the other. And we now had a complete cave system going right the way through. Since then, we've had more explorations, and that's what the map of the cave now looks like. And that is the result of basically 100 years' worth of caving with weekend cavers in the Yorkshire Dales. You can see how it all works on progressively now as well. I hope so. Just round the corner from there, a bit of a landmark here too. This is Kingsdale, next door to Ingleborough. An important site because underneath here there's a huge great underwater cave which at the time was the longest underwater cave in the world, and it was explored by a couple of really renowned divers, Jeff Eden and Oliver Statham, Bears, we knew him as well, and the other friends as well. They explored this cave and they were partly financed by an expedition grant from the Royal Geographical Society for exploration in England. In 1978. And the thing is, this is the last time the RGS coughed up money for exploring England. I think the rest of it's been fairly well explored. I know that's how it works. Right. We now have what's called the three counties system, whereby all these caves have been joined together as well. And you can now go from Yorkshire to Cumbria for the Lake District, underneath Lancashire, which goes down really well with Yorkshiremen who want a weekend in Lancashire, in Cumbria, in the Lake District. Got that one wrong, didn't I? So these are great caves. This is the three counties cave system. Fabulous caves as well. Big streamways, high-level passages, beautifully decorated. Other parts of the country as well. South Wales has got miles and miles of caves there around the south crop of the main coalfield. Mendip has got caves too, but they're all a bit smaller and a bit more gentle. The best bit of Mendip, which I guess most of you will know, will of course be Cheddar Gorge. Cheddar Gorge has got caves associated with it as well. We look on our old friend Google Earth here. There's Cheddar Gorge, you should be able to pick it out, and there's the Mendip Plateau as well. If we go back 25 years or something like that, then in red there, we've got a series of caves which are known from the sinks off a sandstone inlier on Blackdown, down to the resurgence down at Cheddar. Within the last few years, the caves have gone like that. And that's exploration which is ongoing now and still ongoing as well. Both the ends of those caves are getting closer and closer together to form the great system underneath Cheddar Gorge too. On the way they found a very big chamber, which in fact is larger in floor area than Gaping Gill, but not larger in volume, so it doesn't really count. The Yorkshiremen needn't worry about it. But the Frozen Deep, you might have heard about it on the way. And another record, well, Gaping Gill used to be the deepest shaft in the country as well. That was beaten by Titan, this great big shaft, 140 metres deep, found in Derbyshire, the fourth of the big caving areas in Britain as well, not very long ago. Then, of course, going abroad. Now, some of you should recognise, I know there's a few people here who will recognise that, and many people as well, because this is Mooloo, which the Royal Geographical Society said, we'll have an expedition out there. Wonderful, we'll do some science. Oh, okay, fine. We'll look at the biology. Okay, fine. But there's some limestone there, so we'll take a few cavers along. Bloody good idea, you know. So that's how I, and Andy Evis, and Dave Brooke, and a few other folks as well, we ended up going out there to explore the caves underneath Mooloo, and these are the most fabulous caves in the world. They're absolutely huge. That's Deer Cave, 150 metres high and wide. That's the passage. It's 1/4 of a mile to daylight in that photograph there. This is superb stuff, it really is. The river passages galore. Clearwater Cave is now 200 kilometres long. High-level passages going up, way up into the sky as well. And then a great big chamber around the corner. You saw that one earlier on, the world's biggest chamber. We found that too. We had an interruption when we went to Java and did some useful wonderful work there by finding water supply for people who are suffering from the droughts. And then, of course, when we finally hit the jackpot in 1984, when we got the first expedition into China, and we were there before the French, hooray! That's the first ever cave which was explored in China. We went in on the one on the left, out on the one on the right, and that was cave exploration that started in China in 1985. It went on beyond there. We moved down to the Guangxi area. We got to huge caves down there as well. The expedition that became the China Caves Project. It was led by Andy Eavis. It went on to great things. We found caves all over the place. What do you do when you got a mountain like that with a cave entrance like that in front of you? China has got everything going for it. It's absolutely superb. And the Brits have done their share there on a huge scale. We went to Tibet and found virtually nothing, so we'll forget that one. And also, unfortunately, just behind us, came the French, and they sickeningly again hit the jackpot with a really huge cave, which is an enormous chamber. But the thing is, the French didn't realise how big the chamber was until it was surveyed last year by Andy Eavis and the Brits, which was necessary to recognise the geography of it as well. At the same time, the French had been in, we were looking then at Indochina, the French had been into Laos, and they found some fabulous, some beautiful caves in Laos, absolutely superb. But over the border, in the same block of limestone, the Camoan Karst as it's called, over the border into Vietnam, then the Brits went there on the other side of the border, and Howard Limbert took a trip into this area and found fabulous caves, miles and miles of passages. Howard Limbert now lives out there, and he's found the largest cave passage in the world. He's found an enormous amount of stuff out there. This is cave exploration at its most dramatic and at its most superb. Interestingly, this is the thing, when Jan and I, much my wife and I, when we first went there, just after Howard had been there in the early 1990s, we had to rent a boat in the local village and trundle up the river. You can see the cave entrance in the background there. But since Howard has been there and explored many more caves and developed, the whole area has been developed for cave tourism, so that when you now go to that cave, what you see is this. There's loads of, now you may think this is desecration of the natural environment, but this is a huge feature of the local economy. It's become a place where the kids will go now. You've got to go and explore the caves, you've got to go kayaking, we've got to go zip wiring. The whole thing has come out of cave exploration by the British cavers out there. Absolutely superb. Meanwhile, the records for depth and length, British and the French, have both been eclipsed. This is just to bring you up to date. The Russians are the ones, they've got in the Caucasus Mountains up here, they've got 2 caves now, which are very steep vertical descents going down a whole series of shafts. 2 caves more than 2 kilometers deep. Think about that. I'm so glad they only found them when I was too old to be invited to go along. Real relief from that. And the Americans have got the longest cave by a long way, with 600 kilometers or so in Mammoth Cave. That's what we've got elsewhere in the world. We've done our share of it as well. We've still got some great caves in Britain. This is British caving. This is up in the Yorkshire Dales, a beautiful streamway there, a high-level passage there as well. This is Britain's caves. This is what we'll enjoy as well. But of course, also we've had our time abroad. And abroad we have Mulu. And Mulu is still, and because of the Royal Geographical Society, is still one of the greatest bits of caving anywhere in the world. Thank you very much. Good night.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Tony.